Okay, today we are tackling one of the most mysterious, most debated books ever written, the Book of Revelation. For centuries, right, we've seen it as this cryptic roadmap to the end of the world. But what if that whole idea is just wrong? Let's get into it. I mean, this is what pretty much everyone thinks, right? You hear the word revelation, and your mind probably jumps straight to apocalyptic predictions, a detailed schedule for events that are still way off in the future. The whole book just seems laser-focused on one thing: what's coming next.
But here's the kicker. What if that entire foundation is shaky? What if the way we've been trying to read this thing for 2,000 years has been completely off the mark? Just asking that one question, well, it forces us to basically rethink a book we all thought we had figured out.
So why? Why is this book still such a puzzle? Well, the answer might be simpler than we think. Maybe it's because the way we've always tried to decode it just doesn't work.
Think about it. For almost 2 millennia, you've had brilliant scholars and theologians trying to line up all the crazy symbols and visions in Revelation with future world events. And after all that time, all that brain power, this method keeps leading them to the exact same spot. A blind alley. That phrase, it comes right from the source material we're looking at, and it just perfectly captures the frustration, doesn't it? For centuries, people have been trying this future-predicting approach, and it's never really delivered the key to unlock what the book is all about.
So, what are we left with? A book that's still pretty much a total mystery. The whole predict the future model just hasn't panned out. It feels like it's time for a totally new way of looking at it, right?
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, the idea here is to go back to basics, back to the source. We need to look closely at the author, John, and one single, absolutely crucial phrase hidden right there in the text.
And here it is. This is the phrase that's both the lock and the key. Revelation 19:10. It straight up tells us that the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. Okay, great. But what on earth did John actually mean by the testimony of Jesus? To figure that out, we can't just look at Revelation in isolation. We have to look at everything else John wrote. His gospel, his letters, all of his work, what scholars call the Johnian tradition. It wasn't just written for fun. He was writing to deal with some very real, very specific issues happening at the time. And one of the biggest problems he was up against was this idea floating around that Jesus hadn't actually come in the flesh, that he wasn't a real physical person, but more like a ghost or some kind of illusion. So John, being one of the last people alive who had actually seen and touched Jesus, made it his mission to set the record straight.
And you can see him just hammering this point home again and again in his writings. I mean, his gospel is full of these really gritty, physical details. Jesus spitting on the ground to make clay, being brutally scourged by soldiers, a real crown of thorns, being pierced by a Roman spear. Come on, those aren't things that happen to us spirits. That's the stuff of a real flesh and blood human life. And this quote right here from his first letter, it just gets right to the heart of it. He says, "which we have seen with our eyes and our hands have handled." It doesn't get more physical than that. That was his testimony of Jesus. It was a grounded, physical, eyewitness account. That's what he meant by testimony. All right, so we've got a handle on the first part of the phrase, the testimony of Jesus. Now we got to tackle the second part, prophecy. And this is another huge shift in how we normally think. We have to completely redefine what prophecy actually meant back then. See, when we hear prophecy today, we immediately think of fortune-telling, right? Predicting the future. But in the biblical world, it was something else entirely. Prophecy wasn't mainly about predicting what was going to happen. It was about proclaiming God's message right here, right now. It was about speaking forth, not looking forward. And this isn't just some wild guess. The language backs it up. The original Hebrew word for prophecy, nabah, its main meaning isn't to foretell. It's to speak forth, to announce, to declare. Just think about the Old Testament prophets. Most of what they did was call people out in the present moment, telling them God's message for today. And I really want to stress this point. This isn't some weird fringe theory. The idea that prophecy is really about proclamation, that's a totally mainstream understanding in theology. It's built on a really solid foundation. So let's just put it as simply as possible. Prophecy equals proclamation. Got it? Because once you really let that sink in, the whole book of Revelation starts to look completely different. Okay, now we get to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And when we do, it leads to a really radical, completely new way to see what this book is all about. So let's just connect the dots here. If prophecy is proclaiming something, and John says the prophecy is the testimony of Jesus, then the big question is, what's the specific testimony that's being proclaimed? Well, it's the gospel. It's those eyewitness accounts of Jesus' real physical life, his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. The Easter story. That is the ultimate testimony of Jesus. So here's how the logic breaks down step by step. 1. The testimony of Jesus is the gospel, the story of his life, death, and resurrection. 2. Prophecy means proclaiming that testimony. So 3. The book of Revelation isn't a prediction of the future. It's a proclamation of gospel events that have already taken place. Yeah, this is where it gets really mind-bending. What this means is that all those end-time events in the apocalypse, they aren't about some future end of the world. They're a symbolic retelling of the gospel story itself, the original world-changing events that happened back in the first century. And the source material we're drawing from puts it pretty bluntly. It says that to truly understand the apocalypse, we have to completely give up our obsession with the future and instead focus on the past, on the real flesh and blood happenings of the gospel. That, it argues, is the real message of the book. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Could it be that the key to understanding the end times isn't some complex puzzle about the future at all, but instead, it's a powerful story that has already been told, a story that changed everything 2,000 years ago?